I've entitled it Following His Presence, Living Out the Feast of Tabernacles in Our Everyday Life. So here's a couple things we're going to take a look at today in our study. The command to live in booths, we're going to take a peek at that. Abraham's journey in tents, because we're living in booths this week, right? Or some sort of temporary shelter, a tent, or some such thing. So Abraham lived most of his days in tents. We're going to take a look at his life briefly. And then we're going to look at the Exodus and the journey of our ancestors out of Egypt and through the wilderness. They also lived in tents, didn't they? In temporary shelters. And we're going to talk about the pillar of cloud and of fire. And then we're going to look at a teaching from the Master, Yahusha, that kind of ties all of this together in what may be a surprise to some of us, because we never heard this explanation of the Master's teaching before. But we'll get to that at the end. That's kind of like the surprise at the end, if you will. And it's gonna put all of these journeys together, and it's gonna lay out for us a pattern for our own life, how we can live out the Feast of Tabernacles in our everyday life. Hallelujah. So here's the command to live in booths. This is in Miqra, or Leviticus, chapter 23. It says, live in booths. And that word for booths is Sukkot, or Sukkah in the singular, Sukkot in the plural. Live in booths for 7 days. All native-born sons of Israel are to live in booths. So your descendants will know that I had the sons of Israel live in booths when I brought them out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim. I am Yahweh your Elohim. So the reason for living in booths is so that we can remember the journey of our ancestors, and that we can mimic them in some fashion as we follow the presence of the Almighty in our daily life. So living in booths, somebody mentioned this the other day, that, it was Adrian. He said that there's a sense in which we're always living in a temporary shelter because our body is a temporary shelter. Paul calls it a tent, right? The tent of our body. So there is that sense of living in this temporary booth, but we're actually to live in some sort of tent for these 7 days so that we can remember their experience. And it's important to remember their experience because Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10 that these things were written as examples for us, upon whom the ends of the ages has come. So the experiences of the sons of Israel were written so that we can learn important lessons in life and not stumble and repeatedly commit the same errors that they committed as they were following the Father and trying to worship Him in the proper way, the way that He's revealed. So the sons of Israel, this is in Shemot, or Exodus chapter 12. It says the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot. And this is immediately after they exited out of Egypt, after they had plundered the Egyptians, after Yahweh had destroyed the firstborn in all the land, except those. He spared those who had the blood on the lintel and the doorpost. Lintel? Yeah. Okay. And after he had performed 9 other miraculous and wondrous signs in Egypt, he was trying to get Pharaoh and the Egyptian people to recognize who he is, to recognize his great power, that he is not just another god of one of the other nations, but he is the true living Elohim and powerful. And so he performed these 10 miracles, many of which were, most of which were plagues, I guess. They were all plagues, weren't they? 10 of them. And he confounded Egypt. And he forced them into a submission of recognizing who he is. So after he delivered his people out of Egypt, and by the way, most of those plagues didn't fall on the sons of Israel because Father was protecting them. And Father will protect us when we're living in the light of His love. He will protect us from the plagues that are going to come upon this earth in our time, leading up to the time that he resumes control, as it were, as king in Jerusalem over planet Earth. So the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, and for the first stop along their way, they pitched their tents, and so they called the name of that place Sukkot, or tents, temporary dwellings. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, and we can surmise by that there were probably about 2 million or so people that came out of Egypt. So that was a pretty large crowd. The Hebrew word Sukkot is the plural form of the word sukkah, which can mean a thicket, a booth made of interwoven boughs. Boughs? Bows?
Boughs.
Whatever those things on the trees are. Hallelujah. This booth could be a shelter in the field for cattle, a shelter for workers in the field at harvest time, or for men in battle, or a shelter from the sun. It was just a temporary structure to protect people from the hot sun and the elements. And so those things were typically built during harvest time, because then people can get under the shelter and get relief from the hot sun, and then go back out and do some more reaping of the harvest. And this is why the place that they stopped for the night was called Sukkot. They pitched their tents and erected their temporary shelters there to sleep. And it says in Vayikra, or Leviticus 23:42, it says, "Live in booths for 7 days. All native-born sons of Israel are to live in booths." And so you always get that kickback. Well, if only the native-born sons have to live in booths, does that mean those of us who aren't native-born, who have been grafted in to Israel, we don't have to live in booths, right? Doesn't it seem to suggest that? Was that wrong? That is wrong. Although native-born, here's the Hebrew word, ha'ezrach. It means arising from, or native, or born, or full citizen. And but here's the counter argument to that, and it's not a counter argument to the scripture. It's just trying to give us a lesson here that we are considered to be native born who have been grafted in.
Full citizens.
Amen.
We are full citizens.
Hallelujah.
We talked about citizenship in the book of Ephesians the other day. And we recognize that those who've been grafted into the body, the one single body, are all considered, members of the household and partakers in the promises. And so, where it says all native-born sons of Israel are to live in booths, it means all of Israel, not just those who, by their physical generation, come from somebody, who was one of the member of one of the tribes of Israel. So we read in my hermeneutic point here, which means how are we to interpret this? Because we've gotten into a lot of trouble in the past by misinterpreting scriptures and the instructions that are given, and misinterpreting what our Messiah Yahusha told his disciples, and misinterpreting Paul and the way that Paul interprets and explains the rest of the scriptures and how we're to live our lives in light of Messiah's death on the tree for us. So we're to read inclusively and not exclusively. Where it says all native-born sons of Israel, it doesn't say only the native-born sons of Israel in the sense of only those who are born genetically in Israel, but it means all. Could a native son but not his father be included? I don't know. Let's think about that. Were all those who lived in booths in the wilderness native-born Israelites? Were all those who were out in the wilderness journeying for those 40 years, were they all native-born Israelites? No, they weren't. They were the people that wanted to join to Yahweh and be a part of Israel. So they were the grafted in ones, the Gentiles, the mixed multitude, as it says in one translation. And so it wasn't just the native-born Israelites, those who are physical descendants, who lived in booths. And so the example again is for us. It's all of Israel, all native born, all who are considered to be native born, because we've been grafted into the vine, into the body. And then it says the mixed throng, the Egyptians also joined in. Some of the Egyptians, and actually people from other nations and other locations. So there is one Torah for the native born and the alien in this, and the Torah teaches this. In one place is in Exodus 12:49. There's one law for native born, those who are born into the family by birth, and for the alien, those who have joined into the family by the second birth, by the Spirit coming to indwell those who long to serve our Elohim. So there's one Torah, and that one Torah then obviously would apply in this instruction regarding living in booths. So we all do it. There isn't a certain class of people who are excluded from the commandments of God, like they could serve God in a different way. That's not the way it works. The scriptures teach us very clearly how Yahweh, our Elohim, wants to be served and worshipped. And he doesn't put various and different instructions or demands on one people above another. He considers us all to be brothers and sisters in Messiah. We all have to come in the same way. We all have to come through Messiah. And so he's given us one instruction. One instruction meaning one for each and every one of us. You are to have, here's another one, Leviticus 24:22. You are to have one right ruling for the alien and the native born. So are only men commanded to go out? Deuteronomy 16 says, 3 times a year all your men must appear before Yahweh your Elohim at the place he will choose. At the pilgrimage festival of unleavened bread, the pilgrimage festival of weeks, and the pilgrimage festival of tabernacles. No man should appear before Yahweh empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way Yahweh your Elohim has blessed you. There's another verse in Exodus 23:17. It says, 3 times a year all the men are to appear before Adonai Yahweh, or the Lord, the Master Yahweh. And again, in Exodus 34, this is the third time it relates this instruction in this manner. 3 times a year, all your men are to appear before Adonai Yahweh, the Elohim of Yisrael. And so this pilgrimage, the 3 pilgrimages that our ancestors were commanded to go up to the place where the Father's presence was, the instruction is that all your men are to go. So again, the kickback on this is, well, does that mean women and children don't have to go, right? It says 3 times. I mean, like, there are 3 witnesses there, right? On the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a thing is established, the scripture says. So does that mean only the men? Again, that inclusively and not exclusively principle of interpretation applies. It's inclusive, meaning all your men. It doesn't say only your men, okay? But all your men, and we need to make that distinction in the way that we understand this. Here's a place that says that more than just the men are to go up for the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Deuteronomy, Devarim, 12 verses 5-7. But you are to seek the place Yahweh your Elohim will choose from among all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling. And to that place you must go. There bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, what you have vowed to give, and your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. There in the presence of Yahweh your Elohim, you and your families shall eat and shall rejoice in everything you have put your hand to, because Yahweh your Elohim has blessed you. And another place in Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 16, it says, count off 7 weeks, and this is a reference to Pentecost or Shavuot. Count off 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain, and then celebrate the feast, the pilgrimage feast of weeks, to Yahweh your Elohim by giving a freewill offering in proportion to the blessings that Yahweh your Elohim has given you. And rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. Here's a listing of the peoples that are supposed to go up these 3 times in the year and rejoice. You, your sons and your daughters, your men servants, your maid servants, the Levites in your towns, the aliens, the fatherless, and the widows living among you. Everybody's to go up and worship Yahweh these 3 times a year. Remember that you were slaves in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, and follow carefully these decrees. So the implication here is that we were slaves in Egypt. We were slaves of sin. And Yahweh is the one who set us free. So Yahweh has the right to make certain commandments and certain requirements of his people. Because he's not only the creator, but he's also the redeemer. He's the one that brought us up and rescued us from our oppressors. Another place tells us who's supposed to go up these 3 times a year. Celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. This is Devarim. Again, Deuteronomy chapter 16. Celebrate for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Be joyful at your feast, you, your sons and daughters, your men servants and maid servants, the Levites, the aliens, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. For 7 days celebrate the pilgrimage feast to Yahweh your Elohim at the place that Yahweh will choose. And for Yahweh your Elohim will bless you in all your harvest and in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. So here we have at least 3. There's actually more testimonies. On the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses, a thing is established in Israel. And so we had those 3 verses about all your men going up. Is this not working?
Yeah, let me have this here. I'll change it. Go ahead.
So there were the 3 testimonies of all your men are to go up, but there is even more testimonies in the law, in the Torah, that everybody's to go up. The men, women, children, strangers, aliens, Levites, and so forth. So everybody is to go up according to the testimony of Scripture. I'm going to give you one more because just to establish this very clearly, in Devarim 31, that's Deuteronomy 31, we're told, and then Moshe commanded them at the end of every 7 years, in the year, is it on now?
It's not.
I'll just hold this, that's fine.
Okay.
At the end of every 7 years, in the year for canceling debts, during the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Yisrael comes to appear before Yahweh your Elohim at the place he will choose, you shall read this Torah before them in their hearing. Assemble the people, men, women, children, aliens living in your towns, so they can listen and learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim and follow carefully all the words of this law. Their children who do not know this law must hear it and learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim, as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Yarden to possess. So the message of how to properly worship Yah and to learn his laws, we have to hear the laws as they're recited and read, and then we have to learn how to obey those laws. This is something that is a very important part of the life of the community of the nation of Israel. Remember, in another place, I believe it was Deuteronomy 6, in that Shema passage, it says, you shall teach your children these things. And you shall write these laws on your forehead and on your hand. And so these things are to be taught when we rise up and when we lie down, when we walk along the way. And what's the other one? And
Go in and out.
And when? What's that?
When you go in and out.
When you go in and out. Okay. So it's important that we teach our children. And if we don't teach our children, we shouldn't be surprised if they go astray. I mean, it's in the heart of mankind to go astray anyway. but we have a strong a force at work in our lives by the Spirit when we teach our children and they understand the commands of Yahweh and how He wants us all to live. And so it's important. So anyway, in this passage in Deuteronomy 31, it tells us that every 7th year during this feast, the whole law is to be read so that all of Israel can hear. Those who don't have their own Torah scroll, the children can hear, and the aliens and the strangers can hear, so that all of Israel will know and understand what the requirements of our Elohim is for His people. So how do we, getting back to the different testimonies, how do we reconcile the difference between the statements that all your men are to go up and then everybody is to go up? And here's where we find the answer to that. It's in Exodus 34, where it says, 3 times a year all your men are to appear before the Lord, Master Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel. And He says, I will drive out nations before you and enlarge your territory, and no one will covet your land when you go up 3 times each year to appear before Yahweh your Elohim. And so it would be in our nature to want to leave somebody behind on our property if the whole family is going to go up. We want to leave somebody to protect our land, right? I mean, that's kind of like an instinct of ours. We want to guard what is our own. And so you wouldn't leave the women or the children behind to guard your land. You would leave men, right? You would leave a son or a servant or whatever to be able to protect the property. But Yahweh says, all your men are to go up. Everybody's to go up. Don't leave anyone behind. Because He says, when you do these things, when you come up 3 times a year to appear before me, no one will covet your land. And He will make sure of that. He's the one who's going to protect our land so that we can all go up and appear before Him. And so that's how you understand the all your men shall go up. It's just that we shouldn't leave anyone behind, even to protect the property. Yahweh makes provision for all of these things. When He gives us commandments, He gives us the ability to keep those commandments, even in practical ways like this. He's going to be the one, by His Spirit, that protects our land so that no one invades our territory and tries to steal what belongs to us. Okay, let's switch gears and let's talk about Abraham's walk of faith. Because Abraham is the example of us all, and Paul in the New Testament kind of makes a big deal about Abraham, doesn't he? That Abraham's our example. And so let's take a look at Abraham's life and see how Abraham's walk of faith is relevant to this discussion of the Feast of Tabernacles and living in booths. This is the account of Terah. This is in Genesis, or Bereshit 11. Terah became the father of Avram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. And while his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Avram and Nahor both married, and the name of Avram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now, Sarai was barren. She had no children. Terah took his son Avram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Avram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. And Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. So the family, Terah and Avram and Lot and Sarai, left Ur of the Chaldeans, that's Babylon, and they set out to follow the river path, and they stopped in Haran, which is the furthest point north in their journey. From there, the journey takes you down the river valley, basically, well, through what is now Lebanon, and down the river valley, so that there's always water and food along the way. Otherwise, if they just cross the desert, most people can't really make it all the way across the desert from Ur of the Chaldees or Babylon. like straight west to the land of Israel. So this is the path they took, and they stopped in Haran for a while, and Terah died in Haran while they were there. So Terah set out for Canaan, but stopped in Haran and settled there. Why did Terah set out for Canaan? Anybody ever think about that? Why did Terah, the father of Abram, leave Ur of the Chaldeans along with Abram? Because we read in chapter 12, we're going to read this in a second, that Abram is the one who received the call to leave and to go to a place that Yah was going to show him. Why did Terah stop in Haran? I would suggest that although the scriptures say that Terah was an idol worshiper, I believe that Father called him as well to leave the idol worshiping nation that he had lived in. And so he and his son Abram and Lot and Abram's wife set out to go to this destination that Yahweh wanted to show them. We don't really talk much about Terah, but I can't think of any other reason why he would leave the land and go to the land that Yahweh was calling Abram. And I think it's because he was calling Terah as well.
Was that before or after he said, I will bless those that bless you?
Before.
Did they leave?
Okay, let's read this, and I want to talk about that too. That's the next slide. So Genesis chapter 12 continues. It says, now Yahweh said to Abram, walk yourself. That's a Hebrew expression that means let's go on this journey, walk yourself from your land, your relatives, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. So, Emmerich, it's not entirely clear that it was only at this point in time when he was in Haran that Abraham received this call. It just, for the record, it says that Yahweh had spoken to Abram. Okay? So it very well may have been that he spoke to him back in Ur of the Chaldees, but it's only at this point in the story where it becomes relevant and as an explanation as to why he's taking this journey. So they all went up to Haran, and then Abram came down from Haran into the land that Father was showing him. So the answer to your question is, it's not clear whether he received the call earlier or later.
So maybe Terah had the opportunity to be that Abraham figure first.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That he was called.
Yeah.
Because they all set out together at first.
Yeah. But when they stopped off in Haran for a little while, Terah died there, so he didn't have the opportunity to go, but Abram did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Now, Yahweh said to Abram, walk yourself, lech lecha, as you'll hear that expression, walk yourself from your land, your relatives, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. Then I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but the one who treats you lightly I will curse. And all the families of the earth will be blessed in you. And so Avram left, just as Yahweh had told him to do. So it's significant, and we're going to talk about this some more, that Avram was told to leave his family. And this is a call for all of us at some point in time, is that we're to leave behind that which hinders. And I'm jumping ahead. Let me just hold off on that. But Abram left his homeland and his relatives and his father's household to obey Yahweh and to go to a place that he was going to inherit one day. So Avram left. And I keep jumping back between Abraham and Abram and Avram. In the Hebrew, his name is pronounced Avram or Avraham. So you'll pardon me for going back and forth in that pronunciation. Avram left just as Yahweh had told him to do. And here's the pattern of Avram's life, is that whatever Yahweh told him to do, he did. He was obedient. and he was immediately obedient in all the things that he was instructed to do. So Avram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions that they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So in verse 6 it says, what is this? 12 verse 6, it says, Avram traveled through the land as far as the oak tree of Moreh at Shechem. And then he moved from there toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent. Avram continually journeyed. And so we see this pattern in Avram's life is that he pulled up his stakes of his tent and he moved to the next location and then he pitched his tent. And he lived in tents from the time he was 75 until he died at 175. So he lived in tents for 100 years. That was his way of life.
Wow.
100 years, yeah. Yeah. And so we continue in Bereshit, Genesis 13, and it tells us of this pattern. He journeyed from place to place, from the Negev, that's the south, as far as Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier. And now Lot, who was moving with Avram, also had flocks and herds and tents. Avram settled in the land of Canaan, but Lot settled and pitched his tents next to Sodom. Yahuwah said to Avram after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." And so Avram moved his tents. There it is again. And he went to live near the great trees of Mamre in Hebron, where he built an altar to Yahuwah. So this is the pattern. Avram picked up his tent and proceeded wherever Yahuwah told him to go. Every time Yahuwah told Avram to move, Avram pulled up his tent stakes and moved. And then he pitched his tent wherever that next destination was. Okay, there's the pattern of Avram. Back to the book of Exodus and the experience of our ancestors in the wilderness. In Exodus chapter 13, it says that after leaving Sukkot, remember Sukkot was the first stop off after they left Egypt, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. And by day, Yahuwah went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. In Exodus 40, it gives this testimony: in all the travels of the sons of Israel, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. And so the cloud of Yahuwah was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel during all their travels. So actually this fire at night was in the cloud, but at night you couldn't see the cloud because of the fire. So this cloud and fire were all one presence of Yahuwah. And in the daytime they saw the cloud because it was daylight, and in the night they saw the fire inside the cloud. And so they, the fire gave them light at night. Bamidbar, this is Numbers chapter 9. On the day that the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the appointment. And we're going through these scriptures, so hang in there because there's going to be a real important point we're going to reach, and a lesson that the master Yahusha taught his disciples. The cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the appointment, and from evening until morning there was a fiery appearance over the tabernacle. This is the way it used to be continually. The cloud would cover it by day, and there was a fiery appearance by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, then after that the sons of Israel would pull up their tent stakes And in whatever place the cloud settled, there the sons of Israel would encamp. They would put their stakes down and encamp in those tents. At the commandment of Yahweh, the sons of Israel would pull up, and at the commandment of Yahweh, they would encamp. There's this Hebrew word, masa, masa. It means to depart or to break camp, but it literally means to pull up your tent stake. And so it's a metaphor in the Hebrew language that you pull up your tent stake, and then we usually translate that something like they departed. Okay, they left camp, they broke camp. So it says they left Sukkot, and they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. They left Etham, turned back to Pi Hahirot, to the east of Baal Zephon, and camped near Migdal. They left Pi Hahirot and passed through the sea into the desert. And when they had traveled for 3 days in the desert of Etham, they camped at Marah. There are actually 33 different stop-off points that the sons of Israel journeyed on through those 40 years. There are 33 of them. And each one of them are listed in Numbers chapter 33, where it says they pulled up their stakes, and then they went to this next location and they put down their stakes. And then they pulled up their stakes, and then they went to the next location and then they put down their stakes. They were breaking camp, and then they were setting up camp. That's the language we would use. And it's interesting that even in the English language, we use that same metaphor for when we're relocating or moving. We say, I'm going to pull up my stakes, and I'm going over there, right? I mean, it's just a very common metaphor. That means to relocate, to pull up the stakes and then put down our stakes. The word nasa, it means to pull up or to pull out. Tent stakes, they pulled up their tent stakes, and then they camped, and they pulled up their tent stakes, and then they camped. The word chana is the opposite. It's the one where they put down. It literally means to encamp or to bend down or to settle. Related word to this root word chana is the word chanit. Chanit is the shaft of a spear. It's a pointed stick, if you will, a spear. And so you can see how that's related to a tent stake, because they would chana, meaning they would put down their tent stakes when they settled down in a new location. And so there's the pattern of our ancestors. They took up their tent stakes. I know I've said this a dozen times already, but there's a point to be made here at the end. And then they pulled up their tent stakes, and then they put them down, because they were following the presence of Yahweh wherever He was going to lead them. So let's take a look at what the Master taught in the Gospels about taking up your cross and following me. Do you see a theme here, the follow part, where Abram followed this instruction that Yah gave him, and he pulled up his tent stakes, and then he settled in another location. The sons of Israel in the wilderness were following the presence of Yahweh, who was in the cloud and in the fire. And whenever that presence moved, they would pull up their tent stakes, and they would follow him, and then they would settle in the next location. We're going to reinterpret this saying of Yahusha, Jesus, in light of its historic Hebraic context. Okay? What's important to know about the Messiah is that he always taught, whatever his teachings were, they were always in compliance with and in conformity with what has been revealed in the law and meant by the prophets. So everything that the Master taught, we should be able to trace it back to something that's said in the law or the prophets. And sometimes we come across these sayings and these things that happen, and it's like we're scratching our head, wondering, is this a new thing? Is this a new teaching? And so we can go off in the wrong direction because we don't understand what the scriptures teach. And so therefore what the Messiah is teaching to his disciples. And we're going to find that indeed everything that the Messiah taught was something from the Torah and the prophets, because he was there. Do not think that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I have not come to destroy, but to fulfill. So his mission was to show in his own life and by his own actions what obedience to the law was all about and how we're to do it. He did this perfectly. We all know this. He was without sin. But he also taught these things to his disciples. He taught them and us how we are to walk in obedience to the Father. And all of those things always and inevitably are traced back to the Torah and the prophets. Okay, so Yahushua said to his disciples in Matthew 16, "If anyone wants to follow after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what does it profit a person if he gains the whole world but forfeits his soul? Or what can a person give in exchange for his life?" And this is one of those expressions that was always baffling to me, because for a couple of reasons. Number one, what does it even mean to take up your execution stake and follow him? Like we're supposed to carry, well, when he was being led to crucifixion, he literally carried that beam, that his execution stake. But that wasn't his experience, throughout his ministry. He didn't go around carrying a cross with him. And so his disciples, when he made this statement, what did his disciples understand him to be saying here? They didn't have a concept of, we're all gonna be taking our own beams across our shoulder and walking up and being executed. That wouldn't have entered anyone's mind, right? I mean, I wouldn't think so. So what does it mean to take up your cross and to lose your life for his sake in order to find it? The Greek word for cross is stauros. It comes from the verb histemi, means to stand up or to set something up. It means a staff or an upright stake, especially a pointed one. It's a pointed stake, is what a stauros is. And a secondary meaning is a cross. This, I would suggest, is a meaning, a translation, excuse me, that was added in later due to an anachronism, which we're going to look at in a second. It was misplacing something out of its historical context or out of its time frame. So a stauros is simply a stake. And haven't we already been talking about stakes and following him? The verb staurao means to drive down stakes or to fortify with stakes. And another meaning would be to crucify, because again, that was a meaning that was kind of added in later. But the actual word just means to drive down a stake. It means to be pitching your tent, right? An anachronism is a chronological inconsistency in some arrangement, especially a juxtaposition of persons, events, objects, or customs from different periods of time. Often the item misplaced in time is an object, but it may be a verbal expression, a technology, a philosophical idea, a musical style, material, custom, or anything else associated with a particular period in time, so that it is incorrect to place it outside its proper temporal domain. Cross instead of stake is an example of an anachronism. Because in the time of the Messiah and his disciples, and actually all the way from Abram all the way forward, a cross was a stake that you put your tent down, you secured your tent down into the ground with. Okay? So the cultural context of this word indicates that Yahushua was saying, pull up your tent stakes and follow me. not carry your cross and follow me. Abraham pulled up his tent stakes, the Israelites pulled up their tent stakes, and this is the manner in which we follow the Almighty and His Son. And so this is the call to His people, is to pull up your tent stakes. Be willing to move when He calls you to move. And be willing to go where He tells you to go. That sounds kind of scriptural, doesn't it? Hallelujah. Hallelujah. So Matthew 10 kind of is another occurrence of this expression about taking up your cross. And this is what the Master said to His disciples in Matthew 10. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. So, again, where does it give us this principle in the Torah about being against father, mother, or family members? Wasn't it to Abraham in Genesis 12? He said, leave your land and your father's household and go to a place that I will show you. And so the instruction is to leave. Sometimes Father calls us to leave family in order to follow Him, because family will keep us from doing the will of Elohim. You know, we all have family members, some of whom have received truth and some who don't. And we love them all, and we want them all to come into the true faith and the walk of obedience. But some of the family members are going to keep us from doing what we're supposed to do. And so Father calls us from time to time to leave family, just as Avram left his family. And just as the Messiah is telling His disciples to leave their families. I mean, that's essentially what this is saying. That, you know, that man is against his father, daughter against her mother. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, the Master said. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take up his tent stakes, not his cross, his tent stakes, and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And so the Torah teaches us those lessons as well, through Abraham and through some other examples. So this is the true Hebraic understanding of what the Messiah was saying. I know that for so many years we have latched onto that idea of carrying, you know, your cross. Because I'm following Jesus, I have to carry my cross, right?
Well, we will suffering.
There is a measure of suffering and a measure of things that we have to give up if we want to be obedient to the Father. But my point here is that the Messiah wasn't telling us to carry our cross, our execution stake, but to pick up our tents and go when He calls us and He leads us somewhere. Because it's when we do that, when we're willing to leave father and mother, or anyone else that would hinder us, and anything else, any place else that would hinder us from serving Him in the way that He has called us to serve Him, then we're loving those things more than we love Him. So we have to love Him more than father and mother and anything else. And that's the teaching of Messiah about the cross. Walk yourself from your land, your relatives, your father's household to the land I will show you. The call is to leave your old life behind, including family, if they are not answering the call. To be His true disciple calls for difficult and sometimes radical changes in our life and lifestyle and in the choices that we make. The Transfiguration is another example of what we saw in the wilderness. The Transfiguration, let me read it from Matthew 17. Because this is another lesson from the wilderness. Or it's a figure, it's a picture of what happened in the wilderness. Matthew 17. it says this. After 6 days, Yahusha took Kepha, that's Peter, and Yaakov, that's Jacob, and Yochanan, that's John, his brother, and brought them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transformed before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as the light. And see, Moshe and Eliyahu, that's Moses and Elijah, appeared to them, talking with him. And Kepha answering said to Yahusha, Master, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 booths, one for you, one for Moshe, one for Eliyahu, Elijah. And while he was still speaking, see, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And see, a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my son, the beloved, in whom I did delight. Hear him. And when the taught ones, the disciples, heard, they fell on their faces and were much afraid. But Yahusha came near and touched them and said, Rise and do not be afraid. And having lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Yahusha only. So this transfiguration event, by the way, was a vision. It wasn't actually occurring in real time, because Jesus, Yahushua, was not yet glorified. And so we understand that this transformation was a vision that they all saw. It was a vision of the future. It was a vision relating to tabernacles, because Peter said, let's build the 3 booths here, 3 tabernacles, one for each of you. And the Father said, no, you don't understand. There's a difference between my son and my servants, Moses and Elijah. And so don't even put them on the same plane. But this very bright cloud was a picture of the wilderness. The voice that came from the cloud that said, this is my son whom I love. It's a reminder of the fire by day and the cloud by night, which they were always to follow by pulling up their tent stakes. And so this vision of the future corresponds to the theme, one of the themes of the Feast of Tabernacles, and that is, Tabernacles is a time of the celebration in the past when the Father dwelt with his people in the tent of meeting, and he led them around, by his very presence. And in the future, when Yahweh will return again and have his dwelling place among his people by the person of the Messiah. So that's what Tabernacles looks back at and looks forward to. It's the presence of God among us. So how do we live out the Feast of Tabernacles in our everyday life? I think it's pretty clear now that we're to follow Yahushua wherever we go. Or wherever he goes, that's where we're to go. And we're to pull up our tent stakes. We're called to be willing to move on and to leave whatever those things are that hinder us and into the place where he has called us to serve him. So it's not so much about carrying your execution stake. Well, it isn't really even that at all. But it's about listening to Yah's voice and following the Master wherever he directs us to go. And that is the lesson from the wilderness for everyday living. And I had to throw in a slide here with my website address in case you want to look up that or any number of other study articles. A little self-promo here. There's my website. Yeah, I'm plugging my website. So what say you? Questions, comments? This is your opportunity to give additional testimony or, I don't know, what's on your mind and heart.